Hi, hello, good evening, all. I'm Dr. Kate Ham. I'm an optometrist here in Wichita, and I am joined tonight with Lieutenant Governor Lynn Rogers from the state of Kansas, where we are all getting to come together to learn about rural voting. I'm so excited you're here. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I wanted to give you all just a little bit of background on Lieutenant Governor Rogers so that you all kind of know how much of an excellent professional he is at knowing a lot about rural voting and what it's like to be somebody that is very passionate about voters' rights and registration. So, Lieutenant Governor Lynn Rogers was sworn in January of 2019 of last year. So it's about a year and a half in the job. But in the past 30 years, you've traveled all over Kansas as an agricultural banking assistant for farmers and ranchers to help with financial planning and investment. So you've truly met our rural population one-on-one. So we've had a lot of opportunities for you to get connected with them. But in the political realm, you've also been somebody that has been served as president of the school board for USD 259, which is Wichita Public Schools, as well as been a state senator. So I am so excited you're here, and you are our leading expert on all things rural voting, and we're so excited for you to be here tonight. How are y'all? How are you doing?
Doing well. It's been a busy day, but that's what keeps me going, and it's something I really enjoy. Interacting with Kansans no matter where. It's a little different now with the virtual system, but every time I can see and talk to Kansans, it's a pleasure.
Well, I am so excited you're here. I know you have a few words and remarks for us about rural voting here in Kansas that you'd want to share. Tell us more. Tell us about your experience and things that you have learned about rural voting and the importance of rural voting in Kansas.
Okay. Well, just again, a little bit more background. I actually grew up on a farm in eastern Nebraska with 400 hogs, and loved my job in the ag banking world and traveling through Kingman, through every county imaginable. And I would work with farmers and ranchers and their cooperatives. And while we didn't talk politics a lot, I did see, particularly the 2 years I was in the Senate when I had retired from the bank. As I traveled around Kansas, I saw how much it had been suffering, because of a downturn in the economy. And when ag suffers, the whole economy suffers. And when ag suffers and communities suffer, there's fewer resources, fewer opportunities for kids and adults and jobs and things like that. So that's why we started this Office of Rural Prosperity. And one of the things that we've picked up or talked about is some of the things that are going on in voting, as well as some of the needs that have been identified: housing, childcare, broadband, some of those kinds of things. And one of the things that as I look at information, and I guess first of all, I want to give a shout out to our county clerks. They do, for the most part, a great job of getting people registered to vote and getting them to vote. And they also have to do it sometimes with a struggle with county commissioners that either don't want to spend money on things or do the right thing. And so I think we want to make sure that we appreciate them. But and then one of the things I've really realized is that, and particularly right now with the controversy of mail-in ballots, what's interesting is how much rural Kansas uses mail-in ballots. We have some counties that are upwards of 50% or more, and I think we'll see even more of that because we've got a record number of people requesting them throughout the state. The other thing that I've also noticed is that our voter turnout if we look at it by congressional district, is much, much lower in District 1 than it is in District 3, for instance. It's a difference of, I think it's 59% voter turnout in the 3rd district, which is Johnson and Wyandotte County, and 44% in District 1. And so, those are big differences. That's a lot of people that aren't having an opportunity or aren't taking the opportunity to vote. And so we've got to do what we can to encourage that. So I think with the mail-in ballot, we made some improvements when I was in the Senate, where we allowed people to, their ballot could count up until as long as it's postmarked on election day. Both the governor and I supported that. But there's more that we can do and should do. We've kind of had a philosophy in the state, not for the good of the state, in the sense that we're voter suppression has been kind of the theme, and we need to be able to turn that around and open that back up and make sure that rural Kansas has a voice at the table.
Yes.
The other concern that I see also, which could be a very big concern, is the census. And you don't necessarily think about that in voting, but we have to have people respond to the census, or we could very easily lose one of our 4 congressional seats. A lot of people don't realize this, but Kansas used to have 8 Congress people, and we had 8 districts throughout the state. And I think it was 93 that we lost the last one. We went from 5 to 4. But we could easily drop it again. And we have some counties in western Kansas in particular. I think we have about a 67% response rate for the census so far. But we have a few counties in western Kansas that are down in the 30s and low 40s. And, and I think that will hurt us. But not only will it hurt us from a congressional district, but it will also hurt those counties because they're represented by folks here in Topeka, and some of those are very big districts now, but we'll have even fewer House and Senate members if people don't take the census serious. And I think again, the suppression of our communities of color in western Kansas is a serious concern. We've got to make sure that they have the option to vote and participate as well. So those are just a few of the things that I see. I was just looking at my notes if I thought of anything else, but I guess again give a shout out to ksvotes.org. People can check their registration. That's something you can carry on your phone as you're talking to people. You can say, hey, are you registered, and have them look it up right then and there. So that's really a great way.
All of those points are just so beautifully put. You really easily and succinctly kind of shared with us exactly what so many of us hear as, people out in the community talking about voters' rights and voter registration. It is so important for us to make sure that every person gets their voice heard, but as well as people feel equipped and ready to head out to the polls. So I think you made a lot of really great points there to share with us how some of those things might be a little different as we are looking at how to kind of go about spreading kind of our message about voter rights and voter registration, as well as you can be registered to vote, but then not actually vote on the day. So that's a big thing as well. So I wanted to kind of ask you some questions, as well as open up the floor for questions for anybody across the state watching to kind of ask anything that they have questions about when it comes to rural Kansas, rural voting, kind of what that all looks like. I know you've had a lot of really awesome experiences with people, so I'm really excited for you to share with us all of these things. So one of my first questions is, I will be very honest with you all. I grew up in Johnson County, Kansas. I grew up in Olathe, and I thought Wichita was Western Kansas for a long period of time. So everybody here, yes, I know everybody's now laughing at me, but I didn't know what I didn't know. After attending K-State and kind of moving on into the world and learning about rural Kansas, I first of all realized Wichita is definitely in central Kansas, south central Kansas. And second of all, there's so much more out there in our state. And so I know we have people from all across the state here, kind of curious about some topics. So how can we, people living in the big city, help our fellow rural voters well? For those of us that have never had, aren't ones that have lived in Western Kansas, how can we empower our friends and family that live there?
Well, I think sometimes we make the mistake and I'll say this about Johnson County as well as Sedgwick County, that we get to thinking that we are Kansas, and Kansas is much, much more than that, and not just Western Kansas, but Southeast Kansas and Northeast Kansas that are rural areas. We have 105 counties. That's a lot. Up until the COVID-19 process started, I had been to 75 of them, and I was trying to get my last 30, done, but that's been delayed, but we'll get there. But I want every county to know that they're important, and I think passing that word on to them, by asking them, and not necessarily just assuming that they will disagree with us. They have differences, we have differences, but our core values of Kansans are the same. And I think we have to also, communicate to our rural neighbors as urbanites that we're in this together. I've always said, my old Senate district when I was a state senator was near west and near south side of Wichita. Not very big. I could get across it in about 40 minutes. And the senator from Northwest Kansas has the last 170 miles of Interstate 70. And he would always get a little upset when he found out how fast I could get across my district. But what I found was the third largest industry in that district was agribusiness. And so if farmers and ranchers are not buying a product, my neighbors were not working. And so really helped me realize that we are in this together. Farmers struggle economically. The whole state struggles economically. So I think that helps us understand a little bit more that it's not an us and them, it's a we. And in the long run, we have to engage with them. We won't always agree, but that we need to be listening. And that was part of the reason I did my very first ORP listening tour. And again, our goal of our second one this summer is it's to go out and listen. It's not to talk or to tell them something, but it's to listen to them and what can we do better.
Wow, I love that. And I really love that you said it's all about the we, not the them and the us. I think that's wonderful for all of us to remember that through all of everything that we're going through in kind of our world right now. I was like, we have a pandemic, we have social justice kind of coming to the front, that we're a we together. That's so beautiful. So we had a question from YouTube that I'm going to pop up here on the screen. So Susan Osborne asked, how important is expanded Medicaid to the rural voters?
Well, I think it's actually more important to rural voters and the rural communities than it is to Wichita and Johnson County. And it's big to Wichita and Johnson County. The hospitals in Wichita write off about $150 million worth of medical expenses that could be paid by Medicaid if we expanded it. That would make a huge impact to our economy. But it's also similar to the other 82 rural hospitals that are out there. Some, it would be 40 to 50% of their revenue gain. And so what that means is those hospitals would have money to recruit and retain medical professionals. Bringing in a high-paying job, helps their economy, keeps their grocery stores open. It's not just doctors, it's lab technicians and nurses and all kinds of medical professionals. So it's to the tune of, to our rural hospitals, actually to all of our hospitals, it would be over $350 million would come into them as an estimate. Wow. And again, we've already been paying that into other states. And so it's many of our rural counties, particularly in Western Kansas, they also have a property tax. That property tax that they pay locally to keep their hospital open oftentimes equals what they would generate from Medicaid expansion. So, they could even look at lowering some of their tax rates if they would expand Medicaid. So we see it as a big economic boom, but it's a big health boom too, because we've lost 6 hospitals. Wellington closed right before the COVID emergency started. So that whole community has not had an opportunity. And all of those were in very rural, small towns. And, many people had to go 30 miles to get to that hospital. Now they may have to go 60 to the next county over.
Wow, that's incredible to think about, that how something that we feel like is such a sectored part of our economy and our world really does impact so many parts, especially for us. This is put on through the Wichita Metro League of Women Voters, how sometimes we have to think that the issues that we're passionate about are also, back to that we. It's so important. We're going to do a real quick switch of interpreters here in just a second, so that way they can have a break, and I have a lot more questions, so stick with us for just a second.
Okay.
And now we have a new friend. So some more questions here. I have one from Kent Williams from Facebook. It says, if my signature doesn't match on my mail-in ballot, will I be notified? I think this is a really unique question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Um, and I'm probably not as big an expert on all of these as I need to be, but as I understand the law that we passed and discussed in the Senate when I was there was that would be allowed. Again, Senator Faust Godot from Wichita really carried that bill, and I really saw how important that was. And it should be what is the rule of the day, which again is one of the reasons why I really encourage advanced mail-in ballots, because the sooner you get it in there, the county officials can respond and check that out before election day. So if there's a problem and you're traveling, you can get back to them and do it. But that's the way the law reads, and I think it's a very those are the kind of common sense things that we should be doing.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we think mail-in ballots, sometimes I think we think about our mail and like what that goes through. Every once in a while something we feel the importance of our things that come to us, like our Amazon packages, our, DoorDash. I know that doesn't come through the mail, but it still feels important. And so making sure that vote is also counted. From everything that we know on the League of Women Voters side, just echoing what Lieutenant Governor Rogers said, is that so that if the signature doesn't match, you will be notified, but your vote will still be counted at that time, as long as it's before Election Day. Always doing a double check is great to do, and making sure you're voting ahead of time. So rather than sending it in the day before, make sure you're sending it a few days before. Yeah. All right. So I have someone that just has a quick question. How do we get out the vote? So how do we encourage people to vote? What's your tips and tricks of getting people out to the polls on Election Day?
Well, this year, with COVID, it adds a whole nother dimension that we haven't had. I know candidates are concerned about, walking door to door. I talked with one rural individual that was running for a seat in rural Kansas, and they were just making lots and lots of phone calls and working from that standpoint. I think the programs that I've seen that have been very successful over the years is, I, as a voter, take one other person with me or 10 other people with me. And my goal during the election process is to find 5 other people that don't normally vote. Now, most candidates will encourage you to only bring the people that will agree with you, but, it's one of those things that I think it's very important. And then, particularly with the current, pandemic, I think we can have, if you're in a job where you're a merchant or whatever, have you ordered your advanced ballot yet? Have you, has it arrived yet? And I think that's really a key too, because one of the things that I see that discourages me about advanced ballots is they get mailed to somebody and then they get stuck in a pile of mail and it's buried down, and pretty soon people can't find it and they lose it. And so, we've got to encourage them to order it, but then to fill it out as soon as they get it. And of course, the great thing about filling it out and sending it back early is you can just totally avoid those last minute, nasty postcards. You can just, it's not going to bother you. You've already done your research on who's the best candidates, and you don't have to worry about the attack ads. So.
I think that's great, especially, so maybe instead of bringing 10 people with you, you encourage 10 people and you send them the link of ksvotes.org to apply for your mail-in ballot. Right. And if you bring those 10 people, you stay 6 feet apart and you wear your mask. I think that's kind of, I think that's all of our themes for this.
Yeah. No, I think but it does take one-on-one communication. One voter has got to talk to another voter to get them to step up and do the right thing.
And I think that's another really interesting point from everything that we've learned in League of Women Voters, as well as across the country, is everything can happen if we choose to work together and you speak and have a conversation with somebody. I mean, if we think about 100 years ago, when women got the right to vote, it happened through conversation. There wasn't social media, there really wasn't TV, there wasn't opportunities of that nature. Where we had to make that difference was through conversation. So I think it just kind of follows through with everything that we have stood for and we've believed in. I have a couple more questions for you. We are getting so many questions. This is fantastic. And so we're going to keep going through them all. If you come up with more, anybody out there, and you comment on them, and for some reason we don't get to it, we will respond at some point, either from the League of Women's Voters side or the Lieutenant Governor Rogers side. We will have a response for you. And if it's, I don't know, we'll get back to you. That's fine too. So just kind of keep with this as we're going. So we have a question from you two. We talk a little bit about how people in rural Kansas face unique voting issues, but if you have any more, and if so, what policy solutions have been put in place, or ideas of policies that are currently on the floor or anything of that nature to help with that?
Well, I think, thinking off the top of my head, I know some of the unique issues are lack of voting sites. We saw that last year in Ford County with just one site for Dodge City. We've heard about it in other states where those are really limited. But again, that's one of the reasons why advanced ballots are so key. And actually, I think our counties that use advanced ballots, the highest percentage of those counties with the highest percentage of use are actually in rural Kansas. There's more advanced ballots that way because people can be done with it and not have to drive to town to vote that day. So, and I know, going to the polls is kind of a fun event to see your neighbors. But again, as you said, with COVID, you're going to be 6 feet away from them anyway, so you don't want to go there. But I think that's the thing is making sure that we talk about those things in advance. That you encourage your county clerk candidates when they're running. What are they going to do to encourage more voter turnout? And ask those same questions of your county commissioners who set the budgets for your clerks. What are they going to do to make sure that every person can vote? And we have kind of a mindset that there are some people we don't want to vote because we're afraid they'll vote against us. And I understand that feeling, but I've always been a big believer that if you don't vote, you can't complain. And I've had that drilled into me as a kid. And so it's important to participate. And and people forget oftentimes that those elections and those positions that are closest to the voter, your township trustees, your county commissioners, your school board members, they spend more of your tax dollars than we do here in Topeka, or what your Congress person pays spends in Washington. So it's really, really, and you have a lot more input on those local elections. So that's why they're so key.
I was speaking with someone the other day, and they were asking about several different political issues from that they felt. They were like, well, I feel like I don't have a voice in Washington. And I highly encourage anybody, and I bet Lieutenant Governor Rogers, you'd feel the same, is to go to Washington, D.C. and connect with your senators and representatives at some point. I think that's a great option. But state and local elections have the biggest impact on you on a day-to-day basis. And so especially if you're frustrated with how something's being managed locally, that's a great way to do it. Whether you love how they're doing it or not, it's always important for our community to be heard. And being a part of that community is being a part of a place where not everybody has the same ideas and not everybody has the same opinions. So especially when you are in an elected office, such as you, that sometimes we get nervous seeing, okay, are we going to have those correct votes in all the right places? But really, when it's the community that's being heard, we all win. I really, truly agree on that one. So I have an interesting question, not about rural voting, but I think it just might be kind of interesting to see just kind of what you have. It just talks about how Kansas farmers might have been impacted by different tariffs and things of that nature. Have you seen, as you've gone out and connected with people, any changes in Kansas farmers and how that they're working with things? And is that impacting the way they vote? Just to kind of bring in a different aspect of rural voting.
I don't know if it will impact them. It should, because it's been a huge hit to them financially. I think most farmers can support the concept that China has been one who's stolen our intellectual properties and things like that, and that's something we've needed to do. But personally, my feeling is that when we did the tariffs on agricultural products, that's not connected. And so our farmers paid a huge price. There were a number of months where there wasn't a single bushel of soybeans that were sold to China, and they were one of our biggest customers at one point. I don't recall the numbers now at this point, but much of our crop went to other countries, and then those ultimately were sold to China by them, and they made the $3 or $4 a bushel that our farmers didn't make. So it's been a huge impact, and it continues to be a huge impact. And I mean, it's very similar. If you're history buff, you know that Jimmy Carter did the same thing with wheat in the 1980 embargo to Russia, and it took decades for us to get those customers back. And that's been my concern, is that when we lose those customer relationships, because they have to have it, they'll go to another country and make it happen. So I do think it's something that needs to be discussed and talked about. Unfortunately, it's a polarizing issue as well, but it's an economic issue. That's why farmers and ranchers have their ag income has dropped a lot since 2016. So
I think it is. Sometimes we forget that everything is connected. When something happens on a national level, where it happens in our backyard, even though we hear, oh, it's going to a different country, I don't think about it too much. Really, how much it does impact and how that should have an impact on our voting.
Yeah.
So we are having so many incredible questions through here. So I'm taking a scroll through everything. I have another question by the same person that's kind of concerned of, okay, how big of the problem is the mail service? Is that a big issue as we're getting mail-in votes? Or is that kind of, it's now a null point because things have kind of progressed so far? Kind of, what are your thoughts on the matter?
Well, I think maintaining a strong mail service, delivery service, our post office is very, very important to rural Kansas, because that's where, and even urban Kansas, that's where much of our, not just our mail, but our packages get delivered. They do the last mile for Google and Amazon and all the different groups. I think it's very, very important. It's also very, very safe. I get a kick out of people being upset about that, but the ID that they want you to vote with gets delivered through the mail. Your stimulus check came through the mail. Your pension treasury check refunds can come through the mail. So it's a non-issue, and I think we need to continue to point out when people say vote by mail is bad. It's like, we do that already. We've had a no excuse request for mail-in ballots, and it has worked fine. There's no way that they can be duplicated that I can determine. You've got to have your ID, you've got to have your signature, so it's protected. And our county clerks and election commissioners both, they do an outstanding job. They don't have, if something like that was happening, they would identify it very, very quickly.
Tabitha Lehman is within Wichita as our elections kind of official, and so it was when I heard her speak at one point, she was so passionate. She's like, we're just a bunch of people that are working really hard to get all these things together. And she goes, this means more to us than necessarily it could mean to somebody else. And so she goes, we're going to work to make sure this happens. And it gave me a sense of pride, as well as a sense of just kind of reassurance that that all of these election officials do have such passion for this, that they're going to work and do everything that they can to make sure that these things, things don't happen and things don't change, change the way that those votes are counted. So I agree. And I think that mail we trust it for so many things. So we should vote with it too. Yeah. I'm going to do a quick switch of interpreters here in just a second. Give them a break. Ooh, if I can get my computer to work. Perfect. And now we have Chrissy with us again. So kind of as a follow-up question. So Kent Williams from Facebook, he used to, so I did an interview with him last night, and every time he said mail-in, it sounded like melon. So we had a watermelon ballot and a lot of different things. So he wants to know, just as a kind of a clarification, how do we know if that mail-in ballot has been counted?
In Wichita, my experience there is, it's probably unique in the sense that, I know that, and when I've done campaigns, when people have voted those have gone off the roll, so to speak. So we don't have to keep trying to get the vote out on election day. We know that their vote has already gone in. I guess I don't have I've never had concerns about that because, usually that's the first results that get published,
Mhm.
once the polls close, there's a huge chunk that go in, right then and there. And I have mailed my ballots back in. I have hand delivered them. I've dropped them in a Dropbox, and and then when I look at my voting record, it always shows that I voted. So, I don't know exactly the guidelines on that because I don't work with that on a day-to-day basis, but I've never had a concern with that getting returned.
Awesome. I think,
counted, I should say. Yeah.
and I think also we have that same trust when we go to a voting or polling location. We have to trust that those computers that scan things, that are everything that we're working through, even though we do have paper sections throughout, we have to trust that process, that those are getting counted and those are being processed through. There's always opportunities for things to kind of have kerfluffles and just kind of kinks in the system that sometimes happen. But I do agree that election officials, especially in Wichita, just because that's our experiences that we've had, really do make sure and do everything they can to make sure all of that. Also, one idea I have is just give them a call. If you're curious, you can always call and ask. Or, some places do have emails or chat options within different kind of governments and all those different things. So, go on your local government's website for your county, and ask, because the worst thing that happens is they say, no, not yet, check back with us in a couple of days, and then you guys just keep checking to make sure. But again, it's that taking that ballot as soon as it arrives in the mail, filling it out, make sure that you're well educated, because you can look up different positions while you're filling it out on paper. On your phone, we carry computers in our pockets all the time.
All the time,
And so you can fill it out that day and mail it in. So you're going to have plenty of time in advance to make sure it is counted. So we have a lot of really cool things. We have a couple of questions, and I'm going to kind of put a little bit of just a couple questions together. So I have a couple of different ones, some coming from YouTube, some coming from Facebook. But people were kind of curious about slate cards and kind of who's on your ballot and those kinds of things. For me, I think the question will be answered by saying it depends on the county, but I wanted to hear from you. So who's up for election? Are there postcards that'll be sent out, or who's on the slate for that, or things of that nature? Do you know?
Because this is a presidential election year, the top of the ticket's going to be the president, and then we have a U.S. Senate seat, and then again every congressional seat, all four are up this year. This is also the year, and then of course every 2 years, every state representative, House of Representatives in Kansas, 125 are up for election, and then this is the year that all 40 of the state senator positions are up for election as well. The only elected positions that are not up are our local school boards and county commissions, or county city commissions. Those are the odd year, and then your statewide officers like governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, insurance commissioner, those are the in-between year between a presidential election and not. So you'll have quite a bit at the top of the ticket, and then depending on your county, you'll have some county commissioners, your county clerks, your county treasurers, your sheriff. Again, a lot of those people that play a very important role on your counties. I don't believe we have any resolutions or amendments to the Constitution this year, if I'm correct.
Yeah, as I was looking at possibilities for Sedgwick County ballots, I will be honest, I did not look into a full statewide of what each ballot looked like, because that's a lot. There's a lot of ballots. There were some discussions with Tabitha Lehman that we were having that there could be upwards of 50 places to vote on the ballot in Sedgwick County. And I wouldn't be surprised across Kansas if there's several places that have that many options as well. Because we do have so many people that are running for office this year because of just the timeline. There's several that are 2 years or 4 years or 6 years that it just happened to be all in 2020. And so I think for many people, sometimes they're like, oh, I want to cancel 2020, or I just want to go back and pretend it didn't happen, or let's take a gap year and just kind of start back in 2021. But I see this year as a really good place because we do have so many people on our ballot to really make a difference in those elections. So I just kind of wanted to.
Real quick, if I can, if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
No,
there also
please.
will, in most, precinct, you also have a precinct committee man and committee woman, depending on which party you're in. Both parties are Republicans and Democrats. They nominate these precinct people. And sometimes we take those for granted or don't think they're serious. But if your House member or Senate member resigns before the end of their term, those precinct people will be the one who selects the replacement. So again, those are important positions for you to consider.
I didn't know that about the precinct officials, that they are the ones that select that person that go in. I think, again, we don't know exactly, as we've seen this year in 2020, kind of as we discussed a second ago, we don't know what life holds ahead of us. And we can't definitely predict the future, but what we can do is put proper people in great places to be able to put our thoughts and our desires into kind of action in the world as that continues in the future. And the cool thing is, too, is these are also ways for each of us individually to get involved with government. Sometimes when I was a kid, I will tell you, when I was in kindergarten, I said I was going to go on and become president so we would stop kindergarten shots. It was at my time. That was when I was 5. And I said, I just don't want them. I got my kindergarten shots. Don't worry, all is fine. I get my vaccines very frequently. So, but I thought the only way for me as an American to be able to be a part of my governmental system is to become president. And that's a great lofty ideal, but how many options are available in local, city, precinct, state government that have opportunities? And so I think it's another opportunity, kind of reminding, when you look at the ballot, your name could be on there too. It's an opportunity for you to get involved. And it doesn't have to be a big old campaign with a bunch of things for some smaller positions, or get to know those people that are running for positions. And then once they are elected, or if not, you can find ways to be appointed to committees and things of that nature. Really allowing yourself to get involved into your local and community government. Because really, at the end of the day, we're all in this together. As we've said, I think 50 million times, since we're all in this together, the only way for us to continue that is if we all participate. So voting is a great way, as well as getting involved with being a part of the local government.
And I would tell constituents that would come visit me when I was a state senator, you may not agree with me 100%. I don't even agree with myself all the time. But, one of the things that you can do to build a relationship with your elected officials is to offer them guidance on whatever your specialty is. Maybe you're an eye doctor. Maybe you're a farmer and a rancher. What I had people do as a senator, we see hundreds of bills every year. We cannot be an expert on everything. And so it's kind of nice to have somebody say, well, if you ever have this issue come up, call me and I'll tell you, the good and bad and whatnot. And so you can offer an opportunity to your electeds to build a relationship outside of parties that just says, I'll just give you advice, nonpartisan on a particular topic. And I really appreciated that because it gave me some insight. I think even for rural Kansans, they always come in and visit their own legislator. It's always good to stop in and visit an urban educator or urban legislator and say, what can I tell you about Morton County, Kansas, or Thomas County, Kansas, and help people understand that the state is bigger than just Sedgwick County and Johnson County.
Yeah. Oh, so good. I think we should just go and just inspire everybody just around Kansas just to be so excited and a part of their community and elections. But I have an interesting question, and it seems more like an opinion question for you, but you are welcome to take any kind of direction with this. This is coming from YouTube. Should local elections officials be authorized to decide if an election will be mail-in only? So how does that, such as now with COVID and a pandemic, can a local election officers do that? Should that be something that we look forward in the future? What are your thoughts kind of around this? This is a really interesting topic.
Yeah, it is. I don't know if I've had enough time to think about it just on my own, that was one of the things that the legislature did in their special session, and the 24-hour sine die was denied the governor the ability to make any changes for the election. And we didn't object to that because that really is the purview of the Secretary of State for them to be able to order that. But there are times, and I think we're currently in that, where the mail-in is really the best option. That might be a funding thing more than anything else. But, I think there are times where, and I've seen in other states where they've done that, particularly school boards, when they want to just vote for a particular bond issue and things like that. I don't think there's anything wrong from that standpoint. And I guess I'm also usually a believer in the best decisions are the closest made to the electorate. So if I was going to err, I think erring on local decision making would be much better. So no, I didn't really answer that, but
I think that was super educational for us to kind of know how did this year pan out? Because I think all of us, as I continually say, if anybody's lived through a pandemic before, I'd love to learn more. I know there are some people that have, but it's still just an uncharted territory and world for us. So I think just addressing kind of where we are in that world is really helpful. I have another interesting question from YouTube. This is kind of in a different direction. Is the state considering broadband services for rural areas, transportation services to polling sites? I know we kind of answered, League of Women Voters answered a little bit about having what kind of we're doing with transportation and different things there. Kind of what's the state's perspective?
We have not, that I'm aware of, talked about transportation to polling sites. That is something I can definitely look into, and because I know that was an issue in the Ford County case and probably a few others. We are doing all that we can on broadband. We did pass, it was one thing that our Office of Rural Prosperity worked on very hard as part of the transportation bill. We look at broadband and Wi-Fi as part of infrastructure, just like bridges and things. And so we have put a $5 million a year for the first 4 or 5 years, and then $10 million thereafter of broadband that we can put out in grants. It's no more than 50% can be paid for the grant, and it would be to expand areas that aren't covered. The previous administration had done some good work on mapping where there is broadband, where there's Wi-Fi. They did 100, the group that they had in, they did 185,000 telephone tests.
Wow.
Did they have service? 65% of those tests failed, and these were places where the telephone company said, the broadband company or the Wi-Fi said they had coverage, and so it really helped us prove to the federal government that it makes us eligible for some funds that we didn't have otherwise. And so we are looking for grants every way we can. The CARES money that came in response to COVID from the federal government, one of our 4 key areas from our SPARK task force is connectivity. And so we've worked with the State Board of Education and many school districts that have had to expand broadband. We kept hearing during the COVID pandemic, the pipeline was full, because everybody working from home and schools and whatnot, it was full. So we have to expand it. It's an economic development issue. If we want people to work from home, people want to start a business in rural Kansas, they have to have good connectivity.
I think it's something that a lot of us in a more urban area take for granted. I have lived kind of all over the country. I've lived in St. Louis, I've lived in Dallas and Kansas City, and then now here in Wichita. And so it's always something that I was just like, oh, well, I have on hand. I can kind of do. During my rotations, when I was in optometry school, I went to a small town in Oklahoma, and I realized for the first time and learned so much about those connectivity issues and kind of what does that look like, how they were able to bring in a lot of business and good things once they were able to get that internet up and running. I mean, a big music star is from the town that I lived in, and it was interesting to see all of the things that people couldn't watch or do to see them because they didn't have all of that connectivity that they needed. So I think that there is so many good things that you all are doing to help with that. And I am so excited to see those things, and as well as how important of an issue it is. And sometimes as an urban group and area, we take that for granted.
Mm-hmm.
We still have more wonderful questions kind of pouring in. So I'm kind of looking down here a little bit. A lot of people were having some good chats too, which I always love. A good chat in the comments about just exciting things about voters' rights and registration. So good. Some other things that, just as a plug-in for League of Women Voters, Wichita Metro, if you want to join, you can join us. If you like talking about these things, if you're interested, if you just want to know more, we're a nonpartisan organization. So it's been fantastic just to kind of be a part of this. And I'm so excited you're here, but you can join too if you're interested. Yep. So I have a question for you, Lieutenant Governor Rogers. Do you have anything from the League of Women Voters displayed in your office or conference room? I think this was just a perfect segue.
Yeah, it's from my wife. So,
well, I think that's we'll allow it.
Well, and it wasn't planned, so she asked me a hard one. I don't know if I do. I might need to get some.
We'll have to figure out some 100th anniversary centennial opportunities here for us to kind of go through.
I do know Wichita is the oldest chapter in the country, isn't it? The first one that was founded. So
it was. So it's interesting to see how many of our members from literally 100 years ago went on to be such leaders in the suffragist movement. It is one of those first and the most just kind of impactful organizations. And so after attending the national meeting, seeing how it's grown all over the country, it's so cool that we got to be like kind of some of the first and some of the kind of the bright minds that kind of brought the whole suffragist movement together. So we're going to do a quick, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say too, I do, and Chris knows, I display a lot of things from my travels throughout the state. So I'd be proud to put something for the League of Women Voters in my office. So
we'll find something super special. It'll be super cool. I'm going to do a switch of interpreters, and so that they can kind of take a break. So I have some questions that I'm just curious about. I know you are on that kind of tour of Kansas, visiting all 105 counties, right? 105? I was right? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So what is something that surprised you during that tour? What's something that you learned or you didn't know, or you kind of was a really unique surprise on your tour for you?
Well, I think even for me, the most surprising thing came even when we were running for the office, as we traveled around the state. I think I first heard it when I was in Garden City. Somebody at one of our stops said they just didn't feel like Topeka listened to them. And we started picking that up everywhere. Every county that we traveled to, we heard that. And I think ultimately we probably could have heard that from people just a few blocks from the Capitol building themselves, because we didn't necessarily think about the average Kansan. And so that has really motivated me in my job, is making sure that we're listening and that we're worried and concerned about the average Kansan. There's a lot of people that can be represented here in this building because they can hire a lobbyist, or they have time to be here, they're retired or whatever. Well, the average Kansan doesn't. Their representative, their senator, are the folks that should be representing them. So, and that's partly our job as both governor and lieutenant governors. How do we govern the whole state, listen to everybody? Again, you're going to have a lot of competing, ideas and thoughts, but we have to, filter those and shuffle through and what's going to be the benefit. But we can't do that unless we start listening. So I think listening's probably been the biggest thing. And then I think the other thing during the tour itself, many of these communities had never had a lieutenant governor visit them before. And so, they were proud and excited, but, I was more than proud and excited. I mean, we've some of the things that I've come across, the businesses, there's a young guy in Jetmore that builds, handmade furniture that goes to the East and West Coast. And,
wow.
The mayor of Colby has a singing dog that can sing happy birthday. And I mean, so there's some really fun, interesting things, but it's by taking time and talking to people.
Sometimes So I watched Hamilton recently. I don't know how many people out there have also watched Hamilton. And one of the lines in there, I also know the soundtrack by heart because I've listened to it probably 50 million times. But one of the lines says, "If you don't know, now you know." And I keep have that played over in my head over and over again as I go through life and I do different things. Is if you don't know and then you learn, now you know. And so, how many unique and cool things we've gotten to have as a part of Kansas that we just didn't know about before because we didn't even think. And so I think that's so cool. I have a unique question from Facebook. It's so kind of spawning off of that. How have you found the best way to reach and connect with your rural voters and constituents? And this could kind of spread for all across Kansas.
Yeah. Pre-COVID was, actually getting out and not being in Topeka. And that's probably the thing I missed the most of during this COVID time is that I don't get out and visit with people. So these kinds of virtual things have been very, very helpful. And we're going to continue to do a lot of those. Even just walking down the main street and, having dinner or lunch at a cafe, can make a big difference. And, it's interesting when people can be very partisan, and they'll say, "Oh, you wouldn't be welcome here." And I've never had that experience. I mean, people will talk and visit, and and again, if it really comes down to just being interested and willing to talk.
And I think you made a great point. It's like, well, I don't know if you'll be welcome here. I think the interesting thing is we forget that we're all human sometimes. And that you are a person. And so when you come and you show up as a person and not just a face on TV or a face on a postcard or a face on a website, you get to make that human connection and you get to build those relationships and you truly get to learn things. And that's where it's kind of beautiful, where you say, well, it's not that different as soon as we sit down and we kind of get to know each other. And I think that's such a unique way that you kind of put it, is like, I just showed up and just kind of, I'm showing up for my state and I'm showing up for my constituents. That's awesome.
And even in Topeka, in the House and the Senate, probably 95% of the votes are unanimous. Now, a lot of them are, just for, administrative rules and whatever. But again, there's just a lot that just gets voted on unanimously. And we don't want to talk about those or focus on those, but we agree more than we disagree.
Yeah. And then sometimes I think we don't know. So this is just another beautiful opportunity for all of us to see, is that sometimes we need to go and kind of look up. And it's another great way to remind ourselves that being involved in local government isn't going to necessarily be divisive, but it's going to be more uniting because you just know more. And so I think it's super cool. So I think that I have one more question. I'm going to kind of check our questions here. We're kind of on our last few minutes. And so this one is a little bit of a different question. I think we could kind of switch it into a nonpartisan, since League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. We don't want to focus on one party. I think it just kind of brings an interesting kind of talk about kind of bringing us back to people running for different places. So how do we encourage? This person had, for Democrats, but we can kind of put that into all people, all parties in rural Kansas. Sometimes is there a difference when encouraging people in an urban area rather than a rural area when they're running for elected office? And how do you kind of encourage that with people?
We talked earlier that District 1, Congressional District 1 has only 44% turnout, and District 3 has 59%. And I think in some cases that's because we don't have as many competitive races in our rural areas as we do in our urban areas. And it's discouraging to run as a Democrat, know you're going to lose when you're in a district that's 80%. But even when we were running for governor, lieutenant governor, we won 9 counties, but we made a big difference. Number of counties, we were just within a couple hundred votes of winning. And so, we made the decision that we were not going to leave any county behind, and we were going to visit as many of them and talk to as many people as we can. And I think that's even if a Democrat is in a district that's difficult to win, or an independent, I think they can be they can create incentive and opportunity to ask questions. The incumbent should have to defend, or the heir apparent, if it's somebody in the other party, they need to defend why they believe what they believe. And it's probably both parties that oftentimes the incumbent doesn't want to go into a debate. And so when the league does these voting sessions and voter information, those are important. And I think as small of you can't have 12 candidates at one of those and get any good information. But the two people running for the Senate, that's a great debate to have, and we need to figure out how do we encourage more of that so that they can ask questions of each other and say, what do you really believe, and what would you do when you get in? Will you vote for Medicaid expansion? Will you vote for this or that? And go into more detail. So I think any candidate that runs can help create a dialogue and ask questions that may not get asked any other way. And so I think it can be as much of your moral right as voting.
I think that was such a beautiful way for us to kind of wrap up our talk. I first of all want to thank our interpreters that are here. I'm going to bring Chrissy on for just a second, just to say thank you to you both. You both did incredible. They have both just brought an accessibility to our conversation. I also want to let people know that there will be subtitles on this video. The goal is 24 hours. It might be 26, but our goal is 24 hours. And then as well as having Spanish subtitles. We want to make sure that this conversation is accessible to everyone, as many people as we can. Also, if you have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at League of Women Voters, Wichita Metro, here either on our Facebook page or on YouTube, either one, or you can kind of learn more about us on our Facebook page or on our website. If you have questions for Lieutenant Governor Rogers, his Facebook page is also attached. And then do you have a good email address that people could email you questions or connect with you with?
They can go to the governor website, and there's a way that they can send information to our constituent services office.
Perfect. I love it. So what you'll do is you will go to governor.kansas.gov, and then at that time there's more opportunities. That's also really cool because you could also connect with Governor Kelly and other officials that are within your office. I think that's great. I just wanted to see if you had any last words, any kind of last tips, tricks, or kind of mementos that you just kind of wanted to leave with everybody watching today.
Well, I think, voting is, while it can be divisive and difficult decisions, once we do it, it gives us a great pride in our country. There's very many places we don't have that right. I have voted in absolutely every election since I was 18. And I was one of the first 18-year-olds that could vote in a presidential election. And, if I was traveling and out of my home, I did an absentee ballot. It's so important. And I think everybody should be encouraged to do that, but they need to be informed, and that takes work. And so, but an informed electorate really can make a difference. And so just encourage you all to keep doing your work, and thank you. You make Kansas a better place, so we appreciate that.
Oh, well, thank you. We truly love what we do, and we truly have a heart and a passion for voter registration as well as for voters' rights. So as a last minute kind of plug, make sure you are registered to vote. Go look at ksvotes.org. That's a way that you can check that you're registered to vote. If you haven't checked in the last year, it's always good to make sure you have the correct address and all the correct information for you. 2, tell somebody, send them the link. If they live out of state, vote411.org is great as well. And then 3, apply for a mail-in ballot. You don't have to worry about masks. You don't have to worry about leaving your house. You can stay in your pajamas and vote, which I'm always about on my couch with my cats. So apply for that mail-in ballot. It is important because for the primary, you do need to be registered to vote by July 14th. So it's coming up. So make sure that you have that, you are registered here quickly. For the primary, you also do need to choose a political party that you want to be a part of to vote in that primary. Unfortunately, you cannot, if you choose to be independent or not choose someone that has any competition in that primary. But you are welcome to vote in the general election, which is on November 4th. So the primary is August 4th. The general is November 4th. So there are so many opportunities for you to get involved, learn more. Keep watching us here at League of Women Voters and on Lieutenant Governor Rogers' Facebook page and all of the work that you guys do in the governor's office. I truly cannot thank you enough for coming out and sharing with us this all this evening. It's been an incredible conversation and honestly, a dream come true. I was looking through pictures the other day in my parents' album that we have at our house. And I found pictures of my brother and I pretending to be statues in front of the State House. So you see, and my brother said that when he grew up, he wanted to be governor, which is funny because he doesn't live in Kansas anymore and he wanted to be only Kansas's governor. So you see these things when we are kids and that we're impressionable. So if you have kids, talk about it too, because there's opportunities for these dreams to come true where you get to be a part of your government and your world. So I wanted to say thank you and just have a wonderful evening and reach out with us if you have any more questions.
Great.
Have a good night.
Good night.